It had a short beak like a bird, and the skin around it was pinched and wrinkled as though it wasn't meant to be there. I looked up at my wife in horror. She tells me, "I'm so happy that I can share this with you."
We find ourselves inside the Marshwood Springs Oddities Society where someone is approaching. Here comes someone now. Let me move my camera real quick. I know I'm in the way. Boop, boop. There we go. Okay. There's Theodore. My goodness, you're earlier than expected. Allow me to compose myself. Take your time. You hear a rustling. Hello there, welcome here to Marshwood Springs Oddity Society. Today I'll be telling you a series of stories from people around our lovely town. Sadly, I cannot yet tell you why, but I assure you, it will become clear. In time. Okay. This series of recordings were taken right where we are stood right now. Let us begin. Our first story comes from Billy, who is here to tell us about his birds. Okay. Well, let's see, I'm gonna butcher this last name. Theodore Riley. Inserts a tape into a deck on the desk. It's hooked up to a single speaker sat next to it. You presses play and you hear a voice. I'm Billy, my wife of 3 years.
My wife of 3 years. She's always been interested in the forest. She loves being with nature, and in our old house would spend any free time she had in the woods. When we moved here, we had no idea about the ban on going into the forest, especially at night. Tuesday is always a harsh day at the shop every week. Another day of buying more than we sold. And the mold in the basement keeps getting worse. I was down there at the end of the day, putting the valuables away in the safe we have down there. When I looked in the molded corner, I thought I saw, a hole. Everywhere the dark rot touched seemed as though it no longer existed. Before I knew it, I was walking towards it. I don't know if it was out of curiosity or shock or what, but before I knew it, I was walking toward the mold. But I'm getting distracted. I locked up the shop and began heading home. I could see Town Hall at the end of the main street. It cast a shadow in the light of the moon that consumed the whole street. The town's so small, I never bothered taking my car out before. I haven't used my car in months. I got home and I started to look for Sarah, and I couldn't find her anywhere. I started getting a little worried, as she usually gets home hours before me. In the kitchen there was a note on the floor. It looked like she tried to put it on the table, but in her haste would have just dropped it. It was a full A4 piece of paper, and it just read, "It's right there. It's right there, and there's nothing stopping me." At first I was confused. I called out for her again, not knowing what else to do. And then it occurred to me, and I was out the door. I'd never noticed her behaving oddly before. She had seemed a bit down as time had gone on. I'd been at the shop so often, and we were having so much trouble with money. I didn't have time to think about... Hey, don't judge me, Theodore, okay? It's not my fault. But anyway, I stopped at the edge of the forest. There's something so foreboding about it, especially then with the moon directly above. The cold light casting the shadows of the leaves onto the ground, like a wall, blocking my way into the forest. I turned around and I looked back at my house. It never occurred to me how close we were to the forest, barely a block away. I thought about my wife, sat at home hours before I finished work, every single day, staring out of the windows to the trees, remembering everything she loved. My legs were weak, and I could barely muster the willpower to turn back and look into the forest. Something about that place, it's rejecting me, repelling my very body. I turned and began walking. I needed to. A thin layer of cold sweat covered my body as I crossed the threshold. It suddenly occurred to me that I had no idea who she could be. This forest stretched on for miles and miles. How could I possibly find her? I decided I should just go home. So I just turned around and went home. So I could wait for her to get back so we can talk about this. Except I didn't. I found her in the forest. I found her in a clearing with moonlight shining down on her under this tree. It was a strange shape, full of holes and gaps. It shouldn't have even been standing, surely. There she was, cradling something in her arms. I called to her, and she turned very suddenly. I felt a weight lift off me as I saw her smile, happy to see me. But the weight fell crashing down back on me when I glanced down to her arms, and my head began to spin. She told me, it's them. I couldn't respond. She gets on her knees and puts the thing in her arms down. She tells me, ever since I was a child, they've come to me, and they've been so lost without me. The thing begins to get up. The thing was... It was almost like a human child, but malnourished. The body and the limbs were so skinny and weak. I was surprised it could even hold itself up. Its head was huge, even for how thin the body was. It had no hair. And the eyes, Theodore, they were huge. They were huge but human, shaking like it was afraid. The bottom half of its face was thin and, oh God, its mouth, it didn't have a mouth. It had a short beak like a bird, and the skin around it was pinched and wrinkled as though it wasn't meant to be there. I looked up at my wife in horror. She tells me, I'm so happy that I can share this with you. And she gets up, turning to touch the mangled tree. As soon as she does, they start emerging from the tree. There must have been more than a dozen of these creatures crawling along the branches of the tree. Sarah turns back to look at me, the light of the moon being obscured from her face as the bird children filled the space between the leaves, but not before I saw the moonlight reflect tears running down her face. The last time she cried like this was on her wedding day. She reaches out toward me. I don't think my head was spinning at this point, but I'm so far detached, I wouldn't even know if I was. I feel their huge eyes, every single one of their huge eyes, shaking, looking at me, looking down at me, and I can see my wife asking me to join her in the shadow of the mangled tree. Once I got home, I didn't want to talk. Every night since then, she's been spending more and more time out there. I can't sleep anymore. Thanks, Theodore.
What was that? Hello? That was crazy. I low-key thought I was about to get hit with a jump scare. I didn't know what to think, but okay. You realize that you have lost track of time. Theodore is on the other side of the room preparing the next tape. It's natural to zone out whilst listening to these tapes. These tapes hold a great power. You will understand soon. Are you ready to continue? I think I need a second. What was that? That whole exchange after that tree thing, I'm like, that sounds like a divorce. That sounds like a good, messy divorce. Well, I guess we can do, I guess we can do one more. Okay, good. Because there's a lot more for you to learn. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Our next story is from James, who's having some parental trouble. But so far, this is like really good. Like, I was definitely, moved in some way. Once again, theater presses play on the tape deck, and once again, you hear a voice. James, my daughter went missing 2 weeks ago. Okay.
My daughter went missing 2 weeks ago. No one in our building saw anything. The camera showed nothing. One morning, she was just gone. The police came by yesterday with pictures of several children. None of them were my little girl. Apparently, at least half a dozen kids have gone missing in the past week. They asked me if I knew anything about any of them, which, of course, I didn't. They left shortly after, telling me to let them know if I have to go anywhere, for any reason. Later that night, I went to my daughter's room. It had been left in the same condition it was that morning. Even her little blue bunny still rested against her pillow. I picked it up and just held it. This is when I noticed something wrong. Her bed. It dipped in the middle. I mean, obviously the bed wasn't meant for a fully grown man to sit on, but the dip was strange. I got up and ripped off her bed sheets to see a hole in the middle of her bed. Too small for me to fit in fully. I could fit my head in, but all I saw was darkness. I immediately rang the police and was told they would send an officer over in the morning. I couldn't sleep that night. My head wouldn't stop racing and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. My daughter was out there. I knew it. The next morning there was a knock at my door. The officer already looked too tired to deal with anything. I showed him the hole. He shone a torch down, but it didn't reflect off anything. The darkness consumed any light. He said he'd get a crew to come look at it later. He mentioned a drone or a GoPro and some string. The last thing he said to me before he left was that I should get some sleep. I went back to my room, pulled away the bed sheets. There was a dip in my bed, much larger than my daughter's. I put my hand on the blanket to feel the mattress, except there was no mattress. My hand pushed right through the blanket, which fell through the mattress silently, revealing my hole. I grabbed my phone, my torch, and tied myself to the bedpost using some old sweaters in the wardrobe. I climbed in. The sweaters slipped apart pretty quickly. That was a bad move on my part. But as soon as they did, I felt as though I was floating. I knew I was moving down because the light from the hole was moving away, but I couldn't feel it. It felt like I was being pushed and pulled in every direction at once. There was no wind, no gravity to tell me which way I was going. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. I was sure this is how it was going to be forever. But then my feet started to drag. I started to halt. There was a floor beneath my feet, despite the fact that should have been a wall. I ground to a stop, losing my balance and falling. I looked around, my only point of reference being the faraway light from the hole. As I pushed off the ground to get back up, the ground felt like cold concrete. I got up and turned, trying to find anything that might tell me where I am. Looking into the darkness, even the light from the hole wasn't enough to tell me where I was. I got out my torch and turned it on, and there, about 10 feet away, stood my daughter, staring at me. She put her arms out, and I can see from the light from my torch reflecting off the tears. I go to her, holding her tight, telling her it's okay. But she was so cold. I noticed it then in the light from the torch. I could see what I thought to be a pillar, but before I could take it in, I heard something. A voice said to me, "You shouldn't be here." I could feel my little girl's mouth saying the words, but the voice wasn't hers. I opened my eyes and I see it was in the back of her head. There was something coming out of the back of her head. It was gray and thin, and eventually I realized I was looking at skin, withered, leathery skin. It went up and attached to a body, 10 feet up at least. It was its eyes. The light from my torch reflected off its eyes that were staring down at me with contempt. I scrambled back, and now I could see it. Squatting down behind my daughter was a humanoid figure, and even squatting, it was at least 10 feet tall. Its arms and legs were so long, and it looked at me with such anger. It raised its arms, my daughter, that puppet, coming with it, and pushed toward me, scraping her feet on the concrete floor. It tells me again through her mouth, "You're not meant to be here." As it pushed her body toward me, I screamed. I got up and run, straight for the hole. A moment later, I hear a creaking sound, like the sound the branch of a tree makes before it breaks, and then a stomping. It was coming for me. Eventually, the stomping stops. And in a brief moment of bravery, I turned my head to see. There was nothing but darkness. I shine my torch behind me, and I see it. The creature stood, facing towards me. It must have been taller than a house. Its puppet is limp by its side, but as it sees I'm looking at it again, its towering form hunches over, holding out its puppet. The thing belts towards me. I could see it was moving much faster than I could ever. But I had no hope but to try to run faster, but the stomping just gets louder and louder. It was just about to reach me, and I was just about to reach the hole. I felt it. The creature swept me up, picking me up off the ground, squeezing me tightly. One of my arms was trapped in its grip with my body, and as its grip tightened, I felt something in my arm grind together, followed by shooting pain. I screamed, but the thing kept lifting me. I couldn't see it in the darkness, but I knew it was lifting me right to its face. I could feel its eyes burning into me. And then it let go, and I fell. I fell down until I passed what should have been the ground and found that I was back in my bedroom. I fell up until my feet hit the ceiling, then straight back down onto the bed, the hole gone. I went to the police and they said I should get some rest, that I was sleep deprived, but I know it was real because that thing broke my fucking arm. You're the only one left I can go to. Please say you believe me, Theodore.
Sounds like a really bad, aggressive dream. When you come to, your body feels weak and your head hurts. Maybe you should rest. You notice Theodore at the window looking at something outside. He turns and approaches you. It can be hard for some people to really come to terms with loss. The denizens of this town know that more than most. I feel an obligation to ask if you can go on despite the situation. Get a little break? Better than anyone. Know how taxing this process is, but if you don't do this, we can never move past this point. Nevertheless, I suppose I must respect your wishes. Theodore leaves you to rest. The strangeness of the entire thing settles finally upon you, and you crack a small smile. You're still not certain of the goal. You don't know if it's worth the suffering, the visions, the drain. We'll save. So, go back to the main menu. Yeah, we saved, so it's fine. So yeah, this is Marshwood Springs. You know, if y'all want to give this a shot, I will leave everything below. It's pretty crazy. You know, I thought I was gonna get hit with a jump scare. Thank God I didn't, because I don't want to break anything around me. But yeah, honestly, this visual novel is like really dope. Like the storytelling, the atmosphere, music, it all really like came together, and I really like it. So I'm gonna obviously finish it, you know, off record. But if y'all want to play it, I'll link everything below for y'all to, you know, take a shot at it and see the rest of it. But yeah, you know, you should definitely give this a playthrough. So yeah, hope y'all enjoy, and I'll see y'all in the next one.